Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Tabitha Blackwell, and I'm from Funders Together to End Homelessness. We're excited to have you all in for this awesome topic of centering voices of lived experience. And clearly, it was a popular one. We had quite a few folks who are joining us today. And we also have the honor of being joined by individuals from two awesome organizations to really dig into this conversation. But first, you all should be on listen only mode. However, if you have any questions, if you look right to the side there, you will see a chat box for you to type in any questions, as well as a space for you to raise your hand. So just let us know what questions you have along the way, and we will integrate that. This is really meant to be a conversation where we really get to dig into the great work and the great work that funders as well as these individuals have been doing to really center the voices of lived experience in the work that we do and in creating a solution to a massive issue that we have here. So to start us off, I wanted to introduce our lovely speakers. So from CSH, we have Ann English, who's program manager, and then we also have Lorraine Cantley, and whom is one of their amazing advocates. And also joining us is Twiggy Garçon, and he is program director for True Colors Fund, and they are doing some awesome work that you all will get to hear in a second here. So to kick us off, I know lots of you know these two amazing organizations, but you can always can learn more. So I'm going to provide them the opportunity to tell us about the work that they're doing to really allow the voices of individuals with lived experience to be heard and centered in their work. So first of all, we'll start off with Twiggy. If you can really sort of talk to us about the work that you're doing in True Colors overall, but then what are some of the programs and initiatives that you all have going on that really focuses on this?
Sure. So the True Colors Fund was co-founded a decade ago by Cindy Lauper, our CEO, Gregory Lewis, and Cindy's manager, Lisa Barbaras. We're a national advocacy organization and training institute that works to end LGBTQ youth homelessness through three program areas: advocacy and public policy, training and education, and youth collaboration. Youth collaboration is probably the second largest of our program areas in the area that that I direct. And youth collaboration is this idea and set of programs that centers the lived experience of young people in all of our work. And so internally within the organization, that looks like a program that we have called the True Colors Fellowship, where up to 7 LGBTQ young people with lived experience from 18 to 24 work with us, like actually are assigned a True Colors Fund staff person to work with on one of our projects for 6 months. And then they present on their project at our annual summit, the True Colors Impact Summit. Shameless plug is September 4th and 5th in DC this year. One of the more sort of notable or well-known programs that we run, which is a bit more external, is the National Youth Forum on Homelessness, which was co-founded in 2016 alongside 20 brilliant young people from around the country, ages 21 to 28, with lived experience of homelessness. And the forum does a lot of things. They sort of sum it up in a way that says that they inform national policy and local practice. So that looks like testimonies and congressional visits on the Hill. That looks like working directly alongside HUD, 1, to create the NOFA for YHDP, 2, to score the applicants, and 3, to provide direct technical assistance to those communities to create youth action boards. And they do a bunch of other cool and amazing things, like the Youth Collaboration Toolkit that's out in the world, and a lot of TA in communities around how to work with young people with lived experience and being a part of the solution.
Great, thank you. That is no small feat that you just gave. So you all are really steeped in this work, and another organization in whom has an amazing program that is really focused in centering the voices of lived experience is CSH. So Anne and Lorraine, can you give us a little bit of background on CSH?
Sure. So CSH, the Corporation for Supportive Housing, is a national nonprofit community development finance institute. We do a lot of systems change work in, all the different areas, as well as supportive housing development lending, acquisition lending, and such. And so it's all over the country, but in Los Angeles, about 5 years ago, we saw a distinct lack of individuals with lived experience in the community being part of the work that was happening in Los Angeles in a meaningful way. And also, as someone myself who has been working in this area for a long time, I really recognize that the only thing that actually moves people that might be on the fence around siting or developing more affordable or supportive housing is a personal story. That's generally the thing that connects people. So, we decided to sort of take a chance out. There had been other speakers bureaus, there had been other attempts to kind of develop an advocacy group with individuals in particular supportive housing programs, maybe, but they were always centered around that particular program or a particular agenda. And what we wanted to do at CSH was create something that was much broader, that addressed supportive housing in general and homelessness in general. And so we started crafting a program that's evolved into a year-long program that really works to support people, not only to learn about storytelling and public speaking, but also to develop leadership skills, self-care skills, boundaries, things that are important when people are going out into the world. So while they're learning also the public policy stuff, they're also recognizing, a lot of our curriculum is grounded in something called narrative therapeutic practice, which is really centered around the individual, so that their empowerment and their experience is really the priority in the work that we're doing. And something that's been really helpful is that not only are they attending workshops monthly, they attend monthly workshops, and they also meet one-on-one with coaches in between the trainings. And these coaches are all folks that are not involved in the industry, at least when they come in. They're performance-based folks. They're either actors, writers, journalists, all kinds of performance art people. And what that does is it really brings, the art-based piece of it. And I think that in the past, when we've used volunteers that were, more of the usual suspects, either providers or, board members or people in the nonprofit world, they really came at the coaching with a different perspective. And the folks that we have working with them now are it's very different the way that they work with them, because all they see is a story that needs to be told. And so people are learning how to tell their stories, how to go out into communities. We go to Sacramento every year. We go to DC to the National Alliance every year. We do panels, we do workshops, we talk to students, and, all those things that you're hoping, I'm sure, True Colors is one of those kind of people that, organizations that we have followed and been anxious to replicate similar types of programming, because there's a very conscious effort to include people equitably and to recognize that not only is the lived experience voice important to be heard, but it's also important that how we implement these programs, how we work with people, and how we continue to prioritize the way that the industry works with people in general is really important. So I don't know if you have stuff you want to.
Yeah.
What was that? Like one of my cats was here.
Yeah, our little person. The thing that I find so important about my connection with the CSH Speak Up program is that relationship piece. So the experience of being homeless is one that kind of really deteriorates your trust in systems and yourself and other people. And what I got right off the bat with even just like doing the interview and being matched with a coach was that relationship building piece. And today I get to see that it's been so purposeful to know that there are healthy people, and that while even the advocates that are participating, that we're learning how to become healthy in relationships. So not even just amongst ourselves, but also with our family. And then when we're out in the workforce, when we're out in the world. So learning how to be in these meetings, learning how to have conversations with those who are in the seat to make a decision, and doing so with the confidence that what I say matters. So there's so much that comes with that relationship piece. And I don't know if there was like clear thought on what was happening when CSH was put together about how that relationship really makes a difference on how a person thrives in the world. Oh, but it means so much.
Yeah. And I can, that's one of the biggest things is hearing, the testimonies of individuals in whom have done this, and who've been through it and feel like their voice is heard. So my next question is, what role, what role has philanthropy played in the work that you're doing, and how have they really supported you to lift the voices of young people with lived experience? We know that we have funders on the line here who are really interested to hear what role they can play and how they can help really lift up organizations like yours who have programs and initiatives and things that are going on and that really truly center your work in what's happening with youth. And so I want to pass this over to Twiggy first, to sort of hear what have you found in how have you found it best currently that funders have been able to support you?
There's a number of ways. I think in a spirit of transparency, centering the voices of lived experience, to your point, and through an equitable lens, has been a very hard push and very difficult actually to get funders and philanthropy behind initially. True Colors struggled the first, few years of sort of trying to coordinate and oversee the forum and collaborate with the forum, because it's not cheap to have 20 young people travel around the country, and we don't believe in working with any young person with lived experience without also paying them a living wage. And so to raise the funds for all of that has been a long time coming, and I think we're at a better stage now than we've ever been before. And so, I think one of the biggest ways is for funders to ask those questions of the programs that they are funding and working with, like how, in what ways are people with lived experience involved in the design and the delivery and the evaluation? Do these folks that lived experience have decision-making power? What sort of trainings are happening? How often are they happening? What is the structure of this body of folks with lived experience? How much are they getting paid? Is it a living wage? Are all sorts of considerations. And honest, to be quite honest and sort of blunt, is for more philanthropy and funding to support this work. We, do youth collaboration TA in a number of communities, and have in a number of communities. And one of the first questions or sort of issues that arises is, how do we pay the young people? Where do we get the money to staff a person, to hire a staff person to work with this body? And so I think, moving forward, what would be most helpful is for there to be grant making and funds specifically for this work.
So I completely agree with that. And we had very similar experience. When we initially started Speak Up, it was basically a fifth of my workload, and I was allowed to do it as long as I got the rest of my work done. And pretty much every year, I was basically, biting my fingernails, wondering if I was going to be able to do it again the next year, because we didn't. And the only reason that we were able to do it, even to the degree that we did, and be able to keep going for 5 years, is because a couple of people like the Hilton Foundation and the United Way here kind of gave us some, threw us some bones and some seed money and said, this seems like a good idea, but it really took, building that, we had a relationship with them and sort of, just throwing the pitch out, and they weren't ready necessarily to fully, invest in it, but they're the reason that we were able to do it at all. Mm-hmm. And now, we're in a much better position also. I think what happens is, the reason that philanthropy is so important is because this is a new space. It shouldn't be. It should have been, there all along, but it is where it is. So this is an innovation. Government is not great at, that this isn't something that they're funding necessarily. So if we want to move forward, and even knowing that all of the benefits that come from this, the outcomes, in terms larger than just housing, and so all those things are important, but really recognizing how to integrate people in a meaningful way into leadership, into decision-making bodies, all of that stuff, it requires investment, because I do think it's true that people are hesitant because, it's something new. They don't think about it, and they would like to have somebody come and tell their story, because that's very, effective in that moment. But it really has to go beyond that. It really has to be about changing, the way that we see people, the way that we work together. It needs to be more of a collaboration, in my view. And so for me, being able to do those incremental steps to start this and have it really focus on the speaking part was a way to gain entry into that, to get people on board, to see, okay, there's value here. There's something, that we want to definitely support. And now I feel like the work is, okay, so that's great that we're here, and there's a lot more we can do. There's a lot more capacity. There's a lot more, amazing skills and talents and vision, as Lorraine likes to talk about, that is available, and that we're really just missing out on, because we're not willing, necessarily to put our funding in that direction.
So
yeah, I would just add to that. Yeah, it was very similar for us, with very initial support from Paulette and Simmons, and honestly a lot from HUD, to do listening sessions, to develop, YHDP and so forth. We wouldn't have been able to have any of the convenings that also co-created the forum itself. And I think, and just one more point to add, a question that we've sort of bounced back and forth with Simmons specifically is, in what ways do folks that live the experience, are they involved in the grant making, right? And in that decision as well, not just at the programmatic and the systems level, but also in deciding who gets these funds and what work they're doing with them.
Yeah. Yep. And so Twiggy, to your point, beyond just giving dollars, how has philanthropy currently shown up in the work, or what have they currently done in your work, and you as well, Anne, to really help move forward the work that you're doing, and even, help bring in new people that might have been, someone who could take you all to the next level, or take your programs to the next level?
Yeah, I would say to that point, just sort of reiterating this conversation that we've had ongoing with Simmons and with some other funders too, around the ways that they are approaching youth serving organizations to assess their own youth collaboration, has been a huge sort of conversation more recently. And I think had it not been for that initial support from them and Paulette, we wouldn't necessarily, I don't know that we would now have Oak and Rakes and the like. And so I think that, those personal relationships and sort of building off of the work of that initial support has been key and essential.
Yeah. And I would say too that over the years, whenever there is something that, say, Hilton, has been involved in, be it a town hall, be it, facilitating a Funders Together in Los Angeles meeting, if it's around a particular issue, the first thing they'll do is call me up and say, is there somebody in your, cohort that can speak to this experience, and would they like to be there? And they would all, and I would say yes, and we have to pay them. And they would say, okay. So highlighting in as many different forums as possible, this population, and being kind of really willing to just include them everywhere has been huge. And it's really expanded our network a lot. And so that's why we're in a lot of different spaces that we weren't in the past. But, I think it really helps because people don't recognize that, for some reason, that, not everybody who has had this experience is different and has had different experiences with different systems and can speak to a lot of different issues. So I feel like people are getting that a little more now. But that has been a great asset for us to have those partnerships. And, like United Way has a huge campaign right now in Los Angeles, Everyone In. And so they're also doing a lot of work, campaign work. We did a lot of work with them around the legislation that passed, HHH and H, where we worked with them and our advocates to do town halls, to do educational meetings, to work with providers, to send out personal postcards, to people and things like that. And it is really about relationships. And I mean, I feel like what's so successful to me about this is going back to something that happened that we talked about earlier that Lorraine spoke to about the Speak Up program, is that it really is a community. It's not just those individuals that are in that cohort, or just their coaches, or the speakers that come in and do the trainings. It's like everybody becomes, a part of that community. And for some people, it's a community that they haven't been part of before. And, it's the same way with the partners. And I feel like that translates to the folks that are in the program as well. And, we don't, after the program is over, we have, an alumni group that people can, or, if they want to be part of it, they can be, they don't have to be, and they've done a million amazing things that I could have never thought of, So just providing that space. Yeah. In that community.
And to your point, and I wanted to bring us back to Twiggy. You had mentioned the youth action boards, and that being something, it's a very local, piece that I know some funders have really dove into, and just wanted to get a little bit more background on sort of what they are and how funders have played a role in those specifically.
Yeah, if you think about the National Youth Forum as a body that sort of informs national policy and practice issues, then youth action boards do that same thing at the local level. And they work directly, in the most ideal situations, directly with the COC. And they've ranged from as few as 3, I mean, depending on the community, as few as 3 young people to as many as 15 or 20. And we sort of highly suggest, first and foremost, that the young people are paid. Secondly, that the young people have at least 1 to 2 voting seats on the COC. And that they meet regularly and have trainings regularly to sort of push ahead the agenda that they set for themselves as young people with lived experience, and 2, so that they are meaningfully a part of design, input, feedback on current programs and systems things.
Yeah. Perfect. So I'm gonna give us one moment of just reminding folks, if you have a question and you would like us to ask, make sure you're typing it into the chat box. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat box as we continue here, just so that we can plug some of your questions in as well. All right, and so you all have done a lot of policy and advocacy work, and you've talked a little bit about how funders have shown up for that. What are some other ways that you see that funders could really sort of work and help within policy and bringing those voices to the forefront?
Well, specifically, okay, there's a couple different things. I think one of the things that I love to talk about is we have one of our newer funders who is not somebody that we would necessarily have engaged before, but she just happened to be the head of the Small Family Foundation, happened to be in an audience where one of our advocates was telling her story and just was, really moved by it and ended up connecting and becoming a volunteer for the program, actually, along with, doing some funding. But I feel like what she did and what's really important is that she gave us some flexible funds so that we could pay people. And that was like a huge issue around how we were doing things, because you try to sort of teach people, over time, like you don't want to lose the opportunity to engage with people. And most of the advocates, or a lot of them are happy to do the advocacy and to go speak somewhere, right? And at the same time, I've seen them be, overworked and, burnt out. And because people, of course, are very interested in having them. And sometimes I've seen people pursued sort of like, it's like there's a homeless paparazzi or something, and people are just like chasing other people down. It's very interesting. So on the one hand, it's great that it goes over well. And on the other hand, we really needed to make sure that people understood that, this is a valuable service that people are providing. If you want people to do this, they're not working in this industry like we are. So flexible funding is really important. And you never know, because it's not something that we regularly do. And we assume people, who are a conversation that I had with someone in the past was, I was trying to negotiate for stipends for an activity. And she said, but these people are housed, right? I mean, they're already housed. And I said, well, yes, they are housed. They're housed in supportive housing, and that's affordable housing. And they're, still, housing doesn't like end, poverty and things like that. So it's just, and also those folks aren't getting paid necessarily like we're getting paid to be there. And it's just that whole equity discussion that people just aren't used to having. And I use a friend of mine's saying, which is, it's not anybody's fault. It's been, we've been programmed this way. It's institutional, but although, I'm not going to blame anybody, I am going to say it needs to change, and we're going to keep pushing until it does change, because it's what's right, and, if we're about anything, when we're talking about addressing homelessness, it has to be that we're about equalizing that that paradigm that has been all about, us telling you what you need to do because we know better, and partnering with people and recognizing that people are perfectly capable of telling us that housing first is the way to go, and we could have done that 20 years ago if we would have listened to them. So, yeah, I could go on and on and on. Don't test me.
Twiggy, did you have anything to add with that?
Yes, underline. Yes.
Yes. Well, we do have a question in the chat box here that I wanted to get to. It is, often working with COCs and other partners mean that those who've traditionally held power or authority need to cede some of that control. Yes. Are there thoughts on how to get that buy-in? Lots of people say they want to listen to people, or lots of people say they want to listen to people with lived experience until it comes time to actually do it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Some of that power needs to be ceded. And I think one of the brilliant ways that HUD has sort of pushed the needle forward on that is by requiring that YHDP communities have a YAB as a part of their application and throughout the rest of the grant if they're awarded, right?
Yeah.
And so funders can do the same thing, right? They can require that people with lived experience are at the table with decision-making power.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I will say, like, I have been incredibly heartened by the fact that our COC now does have a lived experience advisory board. How well that's functioning is yet to be determined. But it's a process, and it's the same, everywhere. And there are a lot of similar efforts happening around Los Angeles in different provider communities. And I'm, with different, with affordable housing, in different areas. And I'm happy that those things are happening because people are taking chances and working. And what they're finding, and I think what's happening with our continuum of care, is they're recognizing, that it's hard work, it's difficult work. And hopefully they'll keep with it because it's incredibly important. And, anything that's worthwhile, especially when you're changing culture, is hard. And so it's okay for it to be hard. And it's okay to have, impasses and all of those things. And that just means that you're working. And that's the one thing. I see these things happening, and I get, we've been able to provide TA in a lot of these areas, and that's great. I just would love to see more folks do that. And I agree that there is more that can be done in terms of requiring people. And even, we as an organization do grant making, and have talked about having a board within the Los Angeles area, for sure, if not, nationally yet, that does just that vets, lending, that vets grant making, and at a minimum maybe talks to providers, right? If we have a panel that will talk to providers before we establish anything. So all of those things are things we're working towards, and hopefully will inspire, other folks in the community to do that. But until it becomes a mainstream, which it will become a mainstream standard of practice. We are always
Yes, it will.
Yes, it will. Yes. We are always going to need, flexible funding in order to anticipate childcare, whatever it is, anything that we are not necessarily thinking about, to support people to be part of this process.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And would you say that's been the biggest challenge that you've had, or what has been sort of the biggest challenge you have right now of really engaging within communities? Because, I know, Twiggy, you have much more of a national perspective of this, but is that seating of power been the issue of, for most of the communities where it's not been as successful?
Well, I think in the youth space, more specifically, well, for starters, we actually are a subcontractor of CSH on our on our youth collaboration TA, specifically to YHGP. But we also do youth collaboration technical assistance to build youth action boards in communities outside of that. And I think the two bigger things are, how do we pay for this work to happen, right? Like where does the money come from to staff the youth action board, both the young people and a full-time staff person? And to Anne's point, where do we have the flexible money to support those folks being a part of this, right? Because there are some folks who want to do this full time and have more time than others. There's some folks who work full time but still are just as invested in this and need support around childcare and those sorts of things. We have two parents on the forum right now who both brought their children to our national convening, so that there's a lot of considerations to have. But I would say yes. So obviously financial support for the YAB work specifically, and also the sort of reinforcement of how necessary it is for this work to be a part of real solutions and community-centric solutions.
And you actually touched on the question that just popped up in our chat box here, but how do you suggest preparing the person with lived experience and the environment, i.e. COCs, for success? That's a great question, Courtney.
Sure. I can answer how we do it now. We're constantly learning, but a part of our process is a pre-assessment where we figure out, are there young people involved? If so, how? If not, does the community sort of have a means to start that process, and what does that look like? We also come in and we do sort of preliminary webinars, but more importantly, we come in on the ground and do actual anti-adultism training with systems folk and with program level folks, sort of to undo the paternalistic and tokenizing sort of behaviors that often happen in communities. And then, we have this mantra that a bird is not an ornithologist. And so while folks have experience, that is also expertise. Also, they also sort of systems training is helpful, but we don't assume that that's all they need, and we ask them what we need. And so we do a listening session with the young people to literally ask, how do you want this to be set up? How often do you want to meet? What trainings would be helpful? What tools would help supply you in your work? Because the issue has constantly been that we assume, right? What people need and what really suits their needs, and we don't ask.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And the other thing I will just, add on to that is I really want to emphasize, like, I do feel like the preparation around the context of where our community is, policy wise and operationally is super important, because I've seen people, be put on, a board or an advisory council or something and not have any idea what is actually happening in those meetings. And that is so disempowering. I mean, it's the exact opposite of what you're trying to do. So I do feel like arming folks with that information, and it does take time and it's work, and it's okay for it to take time and for it to be hard. And, providing them with that preparation. And also, I think, I mentioned a large part of our Speak Up training is centered around self-awareness and self-care and monitoring. When people are in a space that is new and that there's a bunch of other people in, and they don't have necessarily the support, and they've been, traumatized, stigmatized, et cetera, marginalized, then, you want people to, have enough awareness that they have a self-care plan in place, and that if things are uncomfortable or they're feeling vulnerable, that there's something that they can do. People, they have a support system, all of that stuff, because people get excited and it's amazing, and you want to support that. And then, like I said, sometimes it can be difficult.
So I'd love to hear from Lorraine. What really helped? What was supportive to your being able to feel comfortable to have your voice be heard within the space? From the environment to, like, what did CSH do that was amazing that helped you find your voice? And then what other things have you seen from, like, COCs and other people?
Again, that relationship piece is huge for me. So from my personal experience, I come from a family who we didn't do like conflict resolution. It was, we dealt with things kind of like as they showed up basis, and we did it in the most possible way, which was very unhealthy. And so what I learned to do is just kind of like keep things to myself, stuff it, and I kind of like shut down the voice. So not being comfortable to ever say what it was that I was thinking or feeling was something that I had learned how to come out of being a part of the Advocates program, and making herself available to me in a way that was beyond the work of it. So for example, while I was going through the Advocates training, my son, my 17-year-old son, whom we had just sat with Maxine Waters after I had been taken to Washington, D.C., and me and her had a really nice conversation, and she came back to the property management that was hosting an event, and I was able to introduce her to my entire family. And later on that day, my son, he goes to take his driver's test. So he's separated from me and the other children. And then on his way back home, someone decided they wanted to shoot, and my son ended up shot. And immediately I wanted to shut down. I wanted to not participate in anything. I didn't want to talk about it. So being responsible, though, I thought to call Ann and let her know my son has been shot. And I'm thinking like that would be enough for her to just kind of like leave me alone and not call me. Just give me the space to just be in a horrible space. But That's not what she did. What she did is she said, okay, I hear you saying that you're okay, but I need to see you. And she got her way to me and my family, and we went out and we sat.
Very pushy.
And we ate. And then she helped me to think through next steps, which is something that I wouldn't have normally done. I would have just like done what was next. And that would have looked like the property manager telling me the only thing that they could contribute was training on how to dodge bullets, instead of me having an emergency transfer to be moved to a place where me and my children felt safer. So because of that relationship, that I was able to learn that it wasn't just about the work of it, but that Anne cared for me as a person. That wall began to get broken down. And then from there was like every question that came up in my head, every acronym, well, I don't understand this policy, or I'd like to be a part of this conversation, but I don't really know how. So her making herself available to me through that mentoring piece was essential to me being where I am today, where now I'm leading an advocates program for the Domestic Violence and Homeless Services Coalition. And I'm always comfortable with being able to ask her, or to know that in spite of my uncomfort, that there's other people that have valuable information, valuable resources. So as I'm working with the advocates to kind of create a curriculum that best supports the work that we're going to do as a Domestic Violence and Homeless Services Advocates Program, I'm more comfortable with reaching out to people and not going to that self that was prior to CSH, that was just like, whatever, I'll deal with life however it comes, and the world doesn't care, and just get what I get, and it goes from there. So now today I'm like, okay, so this didn't work, so now let me find out about this program and how does that work. And yeah, that's a huge piece, because now not only am I empowering myself, but when I'm speaking to the advocates and when they're experiencing things, being able to educate them and let them know there are services, there are specific laws set in place that we don't learn about unless someone is willing to share with us. There's laws set in place that are protecting people who have experienced domestic violence, but we don't get these things. Not even when we go into the domestic violence center, like no one is just handing these things out to us. So preparing us with just that comfort of knowing that any question is a good question, and that there are things, there's so much to know. So there are things that will come up, and whenever it comes up, just knowing that you can reach out to somebody and say, hey, what does that mean? Or how do I navigate this?
Yeah. I think that's the whole thing is like what we're trying to instill in the work that we're doing, and that's the community piece, right? I mean, Lorraine and I had have a great relationship, and I try to, obviously have a good relationship with all the folks that are, but it's more about, the folks that we bring on as volunteers, as coaches, and all of that. You just try to instill that idea with them that this is about, building a relationship, and this is, there's all these other things that are going to come out of it. But the main thing is that people feel safe and, are able to become, their best selves, whatever that means for them, so.
Well, thank you, Lorraine, for sharing. And, I think you just summed up the reason why this is important. And for us to not just look at homelessness as an issue, it is people behind that. And the people who are behind that are not broken people. They are people who have strength and power. And we want to make sure that we're giving them their power back if they feel like they've lost it somehow, and that they're able to speak. And so we really, I appreciate you joining this conversation to really provide your voice to this. And we actually got a really interesting question. And you sort of tapped into this. It said, are there additional social issues beyond housing where you have seen inclusion of people with lived experience be effective? And as you were talking about domestic violence, I mean, there's lots of different issues. I think that this really can, that people should be brought to the forefront and whom have lived experience. But would love to hear your thoughts on that. And I'll give to Twiggy for a second here because it looked like you
Yeah,
had something.
my former work was at a nonprofit. It did all sorts of housings, but the largest of their housing programs was for people living with HIV and AIDS. And I can say in that movement, it is majority led by people living with HIV and AIDS. And so I think that's just one example, but there's so many examples. Intimate partner violence or domestic violence. I mean, there's so many, I think, movements that are led by folks with lived experience, and I think we're catching up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in any issue, in any social issue that you can think of, if people that are the most impacted are not part of the solution, it just makes no sense, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of great work happen in the justice involved space, you know, and the mental health space, healthcare, all of that stuff. So
Exactly.
Prior to the CSH, I was community organizing, and like the highlight of that work for me was in the educational aspect. And what we've been learning is that it's very difficult for a child to show up and be present in the I'm ready to learn space when they've just left from a home whose the parents are dealing with addiction, and then I had to walk past a gang on the way here, and I may not have the materials that I need to feel like I'm ready to learn. And so that, yeah, it starts all the way from the very beginning when we look at how our children are given the opportunity to feel supported and to know that there are other options beyond just the idea of I'm living in poverty, or this is a horrible educational support system that I have. And then dealing with the healthcare piece and the mental health piece. So many things that are connected. But I'm learning that so I was just at the Homeless Initiative conference. It was super wonderful to hear the people share about the feedback from the ad hoc, from the Black people experiencing homelessness.
that's part of our continuum of care is convene some of these work groups. So there's an ad hoc committee on Black people experiencing homelessness. Sorry.
No, that's and then she always gives me like a foundation to whatever topic that I'm able to speak to, and that's great. That's helpful.
Okay.
It's very helpful. Learning like where the structural piece had failed us. And now that we are given our voice, how do we show up in a space and begin to train our minds to be strategic enough to provide solutions, and then work with someone else who has the power,
right?
Whether it be financially or relationally, but
yeah,
knowing that dynamic of let's shift in this power,
right?
Because now I understand what is the solution and how I can provide that. And now, can you hear me? And are you comfortable enough with getting uncomfortable with doing something different?
Right.
Yeah. And we actually have a really good question of, do you have an example of a time when the group or a group of people with lived experience were not listened to and their advice was not taken? How did it work? How did you work to ensure that advocates still felt heard and not disheartened?
I mean, it happens all the time, unfortunately. And I feel like it's a constant challenge, not only to, educate those. I mean, early on with our alumni group, I was encouraging them because I would ask them what was important to them. They would bring up things about property management or service providers or the way, different types of treatments that they wanted to address. And so, we would arrange to have, trainings maybe for a group of property managers or something like that. And they were great. But, as much as we're trying to train people on the other side, it's also about, again, reinforcing the self-care piece, understanding what the context is so that there is an understanding that people, I think one of the biggest pieces of the original alumni work was talking about how we partner in a way where, like, we're going to have to be the bigger people to make sure that, and I don't even believe this necessarily, is the right way to do it, but understanding that people feel threatened, how can we reach a hand out and say, we're not trying to blame you. What we're trying to do is make things better, for you and for us, that kind of thing. So we spent a lot of time talking about that and talking about why people feel threatened, and why people, have this cultural idea of how things are and stuff like that. So I think that helps if people understand kind of, the history and the framework of how people got there, and then they understand that it's not just like people aren't listening to me, it's like people have their own histories and biases and things that they have to work through as well. So.
And giving information before the meeting, that's very helpful. So I know that there's been times where advocates have been taken into spaces where they have the newbies, the people who aren't looking forward to you coming in and telling your story in order to change hearts on the idea of who's going to be housed in their neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think just sharing with them, like, you're going into this space and these people think this way, they feel this way.
Yeah.
And we did do exercises in the program of when you feel safe, when you are. Yeah, that was very helpful. Yeah.
We just have some signs from the training that say safe and open and unsafe and closed off. It's nothing.
Yeah, and then just noticing, like, the self-awareness, being very self-aware, advocates to be in a space to where they know when they can say, you know what, this is not helpful for me right now, and I'm going to go take care of myself.
Yeah. And
then always reminding them that whenever you need to, go take care of yourself.
Yeah.
No one's going to be upset with you, and
right.
We still have this space available for you, even though you may have to walk away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have much to add to that. Underline again, and just to be transparent. Particularly, in the preparation sort of space, like transparent about about expectations, about what's realistic, about not only what the meeting or convening or event is, but what are the actual realistic outcomes of that event. Like, is it realistic that you give this input or this idea or this feedback or the solution? How realistic is that going to be implemented? And just being really honest about that from the beginning.
Yep, absolutely.
Beautiful.
Absolutely. And so I just want to make my one shameless plug real fast, since Twiggy got to do it. I'm going to make one too, which is that we're working at CSH with Twiggy's friend Anna Leva to create Anne and I are working on a toolkit for the other communities that want to implement, the Speak Up program. I think to another question that you asked earlier about, some of the biggest challenges, for me, one of the biggest challenges is, trusting that the stuff that I put out there, like, I'm afraid that people will not implement with fidelity, and that they will kind of do what they tend to do and not center the person with lived experience. And to some degree, I mean, there's only so much you can do. You can give them, you know, kind of the framework and the blueprint, but I feel like that piece of it is really the critical piece and is what allows for all these great outcomes.
Mhm.
So, but we are going to have a toolkit, and you know, so it will be great to see how things are implemented in other communities, and yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, I want to go ahead and let everyone know that we have a few more minutes left here, but we want to, if you have any last burning questions, please let us know. But we have a few last things that I want to get from this group. Twiggy, you mentioned that without the support of Simmons and Polad, that you wouldn't have had the support of Oak and others. And did that come from the funders talking to other funders about your work, or was it the funders really coming and asking True Colors, you know, who else is funding you?
I think it was a bit of all of those things. I think it was partially seeing the work of the forum and its impact. I think that was the first thing, and honestly the most important thing. And then the curiosity behind, well, how is this happening? Who is supporting this question comes up, and then the introductory question, well, you should talk to this person, it's sort of like a trickle effect.
Yeah.
But I have to underline that initial support, because that sort of foundational trust, that sort of risk, if you will, to try something new and try something differently, made it all possible. And so, you know, the work speaks for itself from that point on. And and those connections come from curiosity behind how the work is being supported, I think.
So to that point, what would you say, and I'm going to give you all a few minutes here, but what would you say is the top takeaway the funders who are on the line right now should be really thinking about when they're, you know, how should they be showing up as funders, and what should they be doing to help sort of not just beyond funding, but also what other things should they be thinking about when they're looking at how they themselves can center voices of lived experience, but also how they can support their community in centering?
Yeah, I mean, the two things that are not directly funding, I think for me, are asking yourself as a funder, like, in what ways folks with lived experience are involved in your work and in the grant sort of decision-making process. And how serious are you as a funder, as an organization, about the involvement of folks with lived experience? Because to fund that work is one thing, but to require it is a different thing. And, you know, I can't underline enough how, if, you know, to me, if the federal government can do it, then so the philanthropy.
No, thank you.
Underline.
Lots of underlining around. Love it.
You know, I totally agree with that. I feel, you know, obviously I feel like I'm a little biased, but I'm biased because I believe this is the truth, that this is the future. And, you know, we've been grappling with issues around, you know, race equity, homelessness, poverty, all of that stuff for a long time, right? So apparently, you know, we don't have the answer. So this is something I believe, if funders or anyone else really wants to get deeply involved in what this stuff really means, then it's about starting. Even, I would say everyone should have, it would be great if everyone had a relationship, if not with a community, with a community member, where they are able to have some sort of contact and connection. Because I think people don't really, if you keep it at arm's length and you don't have that relationship, it's really, really easy to not understand. You know, the reason I'm so passionate is because I was a provider for 1,000 years. I knew people, you know, I knew the stories, right? So I feel like anybody who knows people who have had this experience, and wants to get deeply involved in this work. I think this is game-changing work that is about more than, I'll use something that I heard from another conference, it's about more than outputs and, numbers. It's about serious community outcomes, changing the trajectory of people's experience and lives, So I feel like that if I were a philanthropist, that would be important to me. So.
Well, I want to thank you all. And no. Sorry.
Yeah. So I would always like to share this. I have an 8-year-old, and he has so much imagination.
Oh my God, he's adorable.
And what I've been learning through our alumni piece is that the only way that we really start to be innovative and take risks is to have a sense of imagination. What is possible if there was no limits?
Mm.
And so I'm asking the funders to take the risk to look into their childlike imaginations concerning this work and what is possible if there were no limits. And not only like limiting like with the system, but like the limits that we have on ourselves, the limits that we have because of our belief about a person or about a situation or about how we think that things should work or could work. Being willing to go into those dark spaces within ourselves and through those relationships, have some difficult conversations, create those brave spaces where we're inviting those voices and invite others who we know are key partners in this work, and let the imagination come alive. Take action.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
Wow.
I think Lorraine summed it up for us all. And so with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. And thanks for taking your first step in expanding your imagination. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Anne, Lorraine, and Twiggy. Have a great day. If you have questions, please forward it to me. I would be happy to take any questions that you all have, and we'll give it to these amazing panelists to answer. So thank you all. Bye.
Thank
you. Bye.
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 He's a great piece.
Twiggy.
I was thinking royalty.
Oh.